Hello everyone, welcome to today's lesson on linear systems by substitution. Alright, so today should be a shorter lesson, just one page long. Alright, because this is the third method of solving for systems of linear equations. Alright, and again, like I said, choose the one that you like the most. Right, sometimes it's actually faster to use one of the three methods, but again, you can eventually figure it out with any of the three methods. So let's take this as for example. Right, with substitution, right, again, our goal for solving for systems of linear equations is to get it so that we have one variable and one equation. Right, so you can isolate it and stuff. So what substitution does is that we can actually replace one of the variables with the other variable. So we still get one variable and one equation. So here's how that works. It's usually easiest to rearrange something when we only have just one with variable with a coefficient of 1. Right, so let's rearrange this top equation so that we have y. We can subtract 2x on both sides. So that's in this form, right? We have rearranged the top equation so that it's just one variable equals to something. And from there, we can substitute it into the second equation here. Right? When you substitute it into the second equation, right, we can expand this out. So, oh, that's minus now, right? 4 times negative 2x. We rearrange this. Oh, now we combine this, subtract that. To get x equals to 3. Okay, just like that. Right, so here's what we did, right? We rearrange one of the equations so that we have a variable equals to the other variable, right? Just a variable by itself. Because when we have just a variable by itself, we can then substitute it into our second equation like this, right? Because when we substitute it, right, we only left with the other variable, right? We only left with the x here in this case, right? And then we can just figure it out from there, right? Combine like terms, isolate the x, all that kind of fun stuff. Once again, same idea though, we have to plug it back into one of the equations. Right, plug it back into one of the equations so I can find out what the other variable is. Okay, so y is negative 2. X is 3, y is negative 2. Right, so generally, as much as I love the elimination method, I actually use substitution quite a lot whenever it's in this form, right? When we just have the coefficient of 1. It's usually faster, for me at least. But again, like I said, just choose whatever one you like. Okay, how about here? Right, so what we can do here, right, is subtract ay on both sides to make x by itself. Right, and then we can multiply everything by negative 1. Right, so that is just x at positive x. Right, and then from there, we just plug, gosh. So this gets rearranged to this, and then this x gets plugged back into our first equation. Right, so doesn't really matter which one equation you want to rearrange to make it do substitution. Right, expand this guy, move the constant to one side, and then combine the like terms here. 12y equals to negative 3. Of course, that means y is negative 1 over 4, right? Negative 3 divided by 12. Whoops. Not gonna box it yet. Plug it into one of the equations. Whoops, skip the step. Okay, you don't actually have to write the step out, but I'm gonna write it out so it's more clear to indicate which equation I subbed it back into. Right, multiply out the fraction. So x is 3. Alright, so final answer. X is 3, y is negative 1 over 4. Look at that, very nice. Okay. Last one here. Let's do my substitution. Right. Can actually just we can do add y to both sides or just subtract 3x from both sides. Multiply that by -1. Alright, so that's something we can substitute. Scoosh this guy in here. -3x plus 2 times this y. Expand this guy out. Uh-oh, that looks suspicious. What is this? Alright, combine the like terms, you got 0 equal to 0. Alright, what happens when we have 0 to equal to 0? Alright, infinite solutions. Alright, which means that both of those lines coincide. Okay, but yeah, that's literally it for today's lesson. Alright, so yeah, substitution is when you have just a coefficient by itself, or the variable by itself is a coefficient of 1, right? Then you can rearrange the equation, or one of the equations, and then plug it back into the second equation. Right? Because again, the goal of the system of linear equations is to have one equation, one variable, so you can isolate it. Yeah, but that's it. So 3 different methods for the past 3 lessons. Use which one you like, or which one is fastest for each scenario. Up to you. Okay, but with that being said, that's it. So, good luck practicing.